This is Eric Vink with the Delta Protection Commission, and I want to welcome you all to our second meeting of the National Heritage Area Management Plan Advisory Committee. And maybe to kick off the meeting, I could note who is present from the committee rather than just open it up for self-introductions. I see we have Michael Campbell from Clarksburg, Lenora Clark from Discovery Bay, Paulette Hinham from Cortland, Doug Shaw from Locke, Carol Jensen from Brentwood. I think I have that right. Brentwood, is that right, Carol? Janet Lake from Freeport, James Motlow from Locke, Elizabeth Patterson from Benicia, David Stewart from Sacramento, Jan Vick from Rio Vista, Jean Yokotobe from Isleton, Barbara Daly from Clarksburg, and ex officio members of the committee, and I will ask the ex officio members to give a brief introduction in a moment, but we have Deborah Kustik from the Delta Conservancy.
Eric, are you on mute?
No, I'm not. Can you hear?
I can't hear you.
I can hear you.
I can hear you. Turn up your volume, Jan, maybe?
I can hear you.
Jan, can you hear me?
Great.
Turn
So,
up your volume.
Okay, I'll proceed. John Takakawa, who we'll introduce in a moment, but he's an ex officio member representing Sassoon Resource Conservation District. And did I see Jeff Henderson on the meeting? Jeff is with the Delta Stewardship Council. He is an ex officio member as well. I don't think he has joined the meeting.
He said he was going to be a half an hour late.
Great, thanks, Blake. And then I think that's it. Did I miss anyone that you know of, Blake?
Melissa Tayaba from Shingle Springs Rancheria is present.
Wonderful, welcome, Melissa. And I see that Matt Holmes also joined. Matt is from Stockton. He's a committee member. So we pretty much have all of the voting members of the committee. We're missing just a couple. We'll see if they join in a bit. At this point, and with an apology to Mike Moran, because we got started on introducing our ex officio members at the last meeting, and then we kind of moved on to the next agenda item to preserve time. But Mike, can I ask you to give a brief introduction, and then I'll turn to a couple of the other ex officio members who are on the meeting today?
Sure, thanks, Eric. Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Moran. I'm the supervising naturalist at the Big Break Visitor Center at the Delta for East Bay Regional Park District, and been out there. We opened up in 2012, and my graduate studies were all about the Delta as well, and so I've been working and interpreting in Eastern Contra Costa County, the Delta, since 1994. I'm also on the Stakeholder Engagement Committee for the Delta Conveyance Authority, and was working with folks on the French Track Futures project. So I'm very excited to be involved with the NHA. This is a really big moment as far as I'm concerned in my career. So thank you very much. It's great to see you all.
Great, thanks a lot, Mike. Deborah?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Deborah Kustik. I'm the Deputy Executive Officer for the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Conservancy. I've been there about 4.5 years. Before that, I was spent about 25 years with the Department of Resources, Recycling and Recovery. My educational background is I have a degree in resource science with an emphasis in environmental toxicology. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
All right, thanks a lot, Deborah. Trevor.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. My name is Trevor Rice. I work for the National Park Service. I work for 4 parks here in the East Bay, Bay Area. 2 are in the boundaries of the National Heritage Area, John Muir National Historic Site, and Port Chicago Naval Magazine National Memorial. I also work for Rosie the Riveter, World War II Homefront National Historical Park, and Eugene O'Neill National Historic Site. Those are out in Richmond and Danville. Yeah, I'm a fairly recent transplant to the Carquinez Strait area. I'm a resident of Martinez, have been for about the last year. So took one of my first trips into the Delta just recently, and very excited to dive into the planning process with you and be a resource and a liaison to the Park Service at large, wherever I can.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Trevor. John?
Good afternoon. I'm John Takakawa. I'm Operations Manager for the Sassoon Resource Conservation District. And in Sassoon Marsh, we assist the private landowners with their dealings with land management, as well as interface with a lot of the agencies in the area. I'm also a resident of Benicia and happy to join the group as a participant. So thank you.
Well, welcome, John. It's great to have you join the group. I see that Gia Moreno joined the meeting. Welcome, Gia. Great to see you.
Hi.
Hi. So is there anyone else that I missed on the committee, either a voting member or ex officio? Okay, well, that worked out pretty well. We have a very good turnout today, so that is great. It's great to see you all. Let me ask at the start of the meeting, and I will ask a few times, well, let me ask as we move into individual agenda items, I'll remember to ask if there is any public comment. I see that we do have some interested members of the public joining us. Welcome, everyone. We love having you. I'm glad you could be here. And especially when you're commenting, if you're one of the people phoning in, if you could identify yourself, if you do comment, that would help everyone. I see a few phone numbers, but I'm not sure who those are attached to. So welcome to our members of the public joining the meeting. Let's move to agenda item number 2, which we did not get to last time. I'll be chairing this committee as the executive director of the Delta Protection Commission, but we will select a vice chair in the case where I would be unavailable to conduct a meeting. I don't think that'll happen often, but we do provide for a vice chair in our charter. So is there a nomination for vice chair of this committee?
Eric?
Yes.
Mike Campbell, I'd like to nominate Elizabeth Patterson.
Okay. Committee member Mike Campbell nominates Elizabeth Patterson. Are there any other nominations?
I like to, Douglas Shaw, I like to nominate Barbara Daly.
Okay. Douglas
I'll second that nomination for Barbara Daly.
Okay, Douglas Shaw nominates Barbara Daly. Any other nominations? Okay, well, we have 2 nominations on the floor. I don't know if there's any discussion. I don't want to put either of our 2 nominees on the spot, but if there's anything you would like to say at this point, we certainly would welcome that. Barbara's raising her hand. Go ahead, Barbara.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'd like to nominate Paulette Henham.
Okay. Would that be in place of your nomination, or do you want to be considered as well, Barbara?
I don't mind being considered, but in addition to.
Okay. So a nomination for Paulette Henham. Are there any other nominees? Okay. Well, would any of our 3?
Question, Eric.
I'm sorry.
I just had my hand up in the chat thing with a question.
Yes, please.
I'll call you back.
I remember when we sort of talked about our interests and the committees and all that. I I assumed that that was kind of part of the nominating process. Are we just nominating based on who we happen to already know here?
It's
or-
complete. Yeah, it's completely open, Matt. It's
Okay.
I mean, the charter for this committee calls for a vice chair, and that person would certainly step in if I'm unable to chair the meetings. So I think I think that would be I think that would be their primary responsibility.
Okay, yeah, no objection. I was just curious. Thanks.
Okay, very good. All right, well, would any of our three nominees like to say a word at this point? Elizabeth, do you want to say anything?
Sure, I'd be happy to say something. I'd be happy to serve as vice chair. I'd also be happy to serve under the other two nominees and more central in the Delta. Have lots of experience of chairing meetings and lots of experience with the Delta. And so I appreciate the nomination. It would be an honor.
Great, thank you. Barbara, do you want to, is there anything that you would like to say accompanying your nomination?
Well, I really appreciated what Elizabeth said. I'm already a member of several other local Delta committees. And so as much as I'm honored that Douglas did suggest me and nominate me, my plate's really full already. And so if someone else could carry this ball, that would be fine with me. So, you know, I'm honored to be asked, but I've got a full plate, so it's up to all of you. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Barbara. And Paulette, did you want to offer anything? Oh, you're on mute, Paulette. Yeah, you're muted, Paulette. I don't know if you can hear me. No, we can't hear you. Can you hear me, Paulette? There you go. Go ahead.
How's that? Okay.
Yes.
Well, I would like to defer to Elizabeth for this. I was shocked when Barbara brought my name up. Actually, I appreciate the vote of confidence, but I think Elizabeth is a much better candidate. And I think, yeah, I would like to stand behind Elizabeth's nomination.
Okay. Well, can I ask, is there any objection to selecting Elizabeth Patterson as vice chair? No, I don't see anyone jumping in. Okay, well, congratulations, Elizabeth, and thank you to Barbara and Paulette and Douglas for the nominations as well.
Thanks to all, and it'll be fun to work with Eric, because I've actually been involved with Eric off and on for what, 30 years?
We go back a ways, Elizabeth.
We go back a ways, yeah, American Farmland Trust.
It'll be great to work with you as well, and congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Okay, before we move into item number 3, there's a couple of announcements I just wanted to make. The first is just a mention that, probably no one is bursting at the seams with more excitement about this than Jan Vick. But if you don't know, Congressman Garamendi authored that would expand the National Heritage Area to include the Rio Vista Army Base. And I think it extends as far as Sandy Beach State Park, County Park, I'm sorry. So that area on the west bank of the Sacramento River, just downriver or south of downtown Rio Vista. And he introduced the bill, he got it amended into a larger bill that passed the House and is now in the Senate. You know, the timing on these things can either go lickety-split or they can crawl along for a decade, as our designation did, but this is very exciting for Rio Vista, and I'll report on that in the future. It certainly needs to make its way through the Senate, but I don't know, I'm seeing what's in that larger bill, I'm feeling pretty hopeful that this will clear the Senate and then we'll have a new edition, albeit less than 100 acres to the Jan. Really impressive.
Eric, I don't know if other people had that problem, but you went out for a little while.
Yeah, obviously everyone's on Zoom meetings in my neighborhood right now. So thank you for that reminder to turn off my my video, and I'll be talking much less from here on out. So we're moving on to item number 3, which is the discussion of potential interpretive themes. And Katie Metro from California State Parks will be the lead on this item. Blake, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say in introduction, or if we just turn it over to Katie.
Well, I could just mention that we have a contract with state parks to work on an interpretive framework. And so this is, we're really excited about this. We kicked off work in December, and already we have at least some discussion, which Katie will go through, about potential interpretive themes. So I'll hand it over to Katie.
Hey, thank you, Blake. Please let me know if you guys have a hard time hearing me too, because sometimes my my video camera doesn't record, and then you hear my dog, or just someone else's dog. Okay, so I've got a little PowerPoint slide to help the conversation, and if it's okay, I'm going to go through the PowerPoint slide, and then I can go back, and then we can discuss. Okay, because we have a limited amount of time on this, and we're going to be talking more in detail on these themes in our work groups too, task groups. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, now can everybody see the PowerPoint? Okay, good. Sometimes there's a lag. Okay, so I'm just going to go over briefly and just to set the stage on what is interpretive planning and why we do it. And then I'm going to head into the interpretive themes, and then we can discuss them. As part of this process, this is only the very beginning. We're at the end. We're going to send out a link to a survey using Google, probably early next week, that we will get hopefully get you guys to put in your thoughts and ideas in each interpretive theme. So this is only the beginning of our discussion. Okay, so interpretive planning, just like land use planning, interpretive planning is necessary to help set the stage and the scope of your work and the stories that you tell for any area, any site. And interpretation facilitates the connections between the interests of visitors and the meanings of either artifacts or collections or natural resources or the history of a site. It also links the site's tangible, which the Park Use Service uses tangible, which is physical resources like a building, a monument, a tree, to intangible meanings, which are like feelings or relationships or values to the resources, to those resources and what they represent. So, for example, if you're at Lock Boarding House or in the town of Lock, it's not just about the fact that there's a town there. It's the history of the town, the people there, and the feelings that are invoked and the emotions that are evoked from that place. So it's tying all that together. And how do we do that? So interpretive planning shows how we do that. Interpreters is the term we use for people who develop educational programming. So you'll hear that a lot. It's also most commonly people refer to it for language interpretation, but in this case it's meant for education and communication. So interpreters we are visitor experience specialists. And you've got people who specialize in wedding planning. We're the educational planning people. We want to make sure that people can, experience a site or a history or a emotion, to the best that we can, and also allow them to be curious about it and want to learn more about it. Interpretive planning provides a content roadmap. I like to use the word roadmap because it's pretty, for people my generation, we had roadmaps at that time. It's your Google guide to map guide to education programs and visitor experiences. And interpretive themes is part of that. So what interpretive themes does is it articulates the reasons or reasons that visitors should care about a cultural resource or a natural resource, such as a building, historic site, or a landscape. In this case, the heritage area. So the interpretive planning section of the Delta Management Plan will help interpretive providers focus content, desired messages, educational programs, social media, and other content. So interpretive provider could be like your historical society or a National Park Service employee or a state park employee or a volunteer. So it helps set the stage for people, these interpretive providers organizations, to get together and work towards a common goal using a set of references like this planning document. Any questions about interpretive planning before I move on? Okay. Okay, so what we're doing today is for part of this plan is we're starting to develop our interpretive themes. And the first step is to define the interpretive themes and periods. And we're basing, interpretive period is like just think of a timeline. So are we interpreting things from the dinosaur era all the way to the 2020, 2,300 and something odd years in the future? No, we want to actually define a narrower scope. And so that'll help us keep our focus. And interpretive themes does that same thing. Interpretive themes will help focus the area of content. And so we are using the Delta NHA feasibility study as our scope for our main, area of focus for this project. Doesn't mean that we can't look at other areas in the future. It's just that this is what we're using as a framework, our baseline. And further work on theme development will be done by, so first we're going to start with this group and then have public input and then we'll further refine our themes and add to them potentially as we go. And then once the plan is done, will be the interpretive staff or volunteers or whoever is working at particular sites will have a guidebook on how to further develop themes for the site. So this project is looking like the map behind me is looking at the higher level view. So we might not get into specific themes for, I'm familiar with the town of Locke because I worked on the boarding house project, but we're not going to be going into all of the things that you could possibly discuss in the town of Locke, for example. But there is a framework that we want to talk about how Locke fits in with the rest of the Delta. And then so the folks at Locke can use that framework to develop their stories that they want to tell in the context of the heritage area. And so we're going to be talking about next some types of themes. We have a lot of nomenclature, a lot of jargon we like to throw around because we're government. And so we use primary, sub-themes, supporting themes. Primary themes are what we're going to be talking about mainly today. Those are your overarching themes, and then everything kind of is an umbrella, and then everything else kind of falls underneath that. So think of it as your guiding topic or idea. Okay. Any questions about where we're at now with what interpretive themes are? Okay.
Just briefly, may I?
Okay.
Lots of times interpretive planning kind of comes after like a foundation planning ritual that usually builds off of the legislation, but do we have any resource conservation obligations as a heritage area to acknowledge? Like sometimes there's, nuts and bolts and hydrology and geology that help narrow interpretive themes. Does that make sense?
That's a good question. Why don't I run through the themes and you can see if I answer your question. How's that? Yeah, because the feasibility study looked at a lot of different topics, and conservation was one of those. So that's a great question. Any others? Okay, I'm going to move on to our actual themes. These are drafts, so don't think that they're in any way, shape, concrete at this point. So the first one is topography and natural processes. That's the topic, okay? And the theme, this comes from the feasibility study. There's a little bit tweaking to make it more interpretive flow. The theme is the confluence of 5 rivers form a rare inland delta and the largest estuary on the west coast of the Americas. So within this umbrella theme, here's some ideas that we can talk about. We can talk about the topography, the natural processes, the habitat, plants, animals, movement of water, things like that. So think of this as your how did the delta form and how has it changed over time? Okay, I'm just going to go through these, then we can go back and talk about them. So theme 2 is a modern land use, is the main kind of topic area. It's a conversion of delta from marshland to farmland, was one of the largest reclamation projects in the United States. And so this one talks about how humans have used the land over time. And how, so we talked about flood control, engineering, reliable water supply, also the impact on indigenous people. We talked about in our smaller group about the people who had to actually build the conversion. So it's how is that affecting the people who live there, but also who built it. Third one are people's stories. So as the rivers carve the delta, carve the delta and the cultural experiences, heritage and contributions of its diverse people mold the rural landscape and communities. And I did not say that very well because I have a dog running around in my background. And so this is really the people's story, human stories. Here we can talk about immigration to the delta, making a life, how people have come and gone over time. This is separate from another one, which I'll discuss in here in a minute. But we want to focus on, not just the people who are there now, but who has come through too, and the future too. Theme number 4 is agriculture. This is mostly focused on the farming practices because it's a rich, rich agricultural history and technology. So the Delta, California's cornucopia, I'm having a lot of problems. I have my braces on. The Delta, California's cornucopia is among the most fertile agricultural regions in the world and a leader in agriculture technology innovation. We've got Caterpillar, we've got a lot of other companies and people who have helped develop technology to farm this really difficult area to farm. And also, how has it changed over time? Right now we have agritourism, for example. We have people going to wineries, doing wine tours, the farm to fork movement. So all that kind of fits under this umbrella. Theme 5 is the importance of water. So the Delta lies at the center of California's water resource challenges. So this is where we can really get into the conservation, preservation, but also the importance of our resources, water being the main one for this particular area. And it can go, you know, as far as you want really with this one. This can go back to the water project, but also how do we look at water today and the water needs of California? Theme 6 is the Native American experience. I put a big asterisk after this because this was not in the original feasibility study, but we felt that we needed to have a theme that's focused on the indigenous people of this area, and we want the tribes to drive the content. So we just came up with a placeholder theme, and then we're going to be working with AUIC and other folks tribes to drive that content so that they're writing the stories that they would like to present. So we provided some examples. They're just placeholders. And then beyond that, you say, well, what about recreation? What about transportation? What about, you know, the artists and stuff like that? So what supporting themes do is these don't really have a particular call out home, but they fall in within that, still fall in with that overall, one of those overall themes. Artists can fall within the people stories. Waterways, the transportation can fall in how we use water and the topography. Recreation. So these can be expanded even further. So we can develop these more and add more to them. Okay, so that's essentially what I wanted to present. We're going to have all of these themes up on a survey that you'll get a link to, and then we want you to get your input. You know, what do these themes mean to you? What are there any major gaps that we're not seeing that can fit within those 6 themes that we presented? And then it'll help us kind of further refine it until we get to our work group tasks. Amanda, is there anything that you'd like to add?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay.
Just to remind everybody, these are sort of the big picture themes. So also, if you have sites that you feel would be appropriate, would be associated with any of these that we may not know, so please let us know about those sites. But again, we're not drilling down to the very small interpretive themes yet. Like Katie said, these are sort of the big picture.
I mean, what is our timing like for this segment? We had 30 minutes, so we can open up to discussion, get basic ideas. What's our timing?
Yeah, no, I think we're doing fine, Katie. And yes, let's open it up at this point for the committee members. And then for those members of the public joining, I will open it up to you as well. But if possible, let's ask if there are any questions or any clarification that the committee members would like. And please unmute yourself and identify yourself too if you're speaking, please.
Eric, this is Mike Campbell, and it seems like some of these major themes can be combined, or they're very closely joined together.
Okay.
For example, conversion of marshland to agriculture and then agricultural productivity.
Okay.
It also brings water into, without the water, we wouldn't have the agricultural productivity. And also the different cultural or ethnic groups that came to work on farms, work in agriculture.
Okay. So this
Mike,
modern,
in the world of lumpers and splitters, you're a lumper, and I'm a lumper too. So thank you for that.
That's why we're doing this.
Come on, dude.
As you can tell, we're splitters.
That's okay. I like both. Was there someone else who was chiming in there that I spoke over? Apologies.
I have something to say.
Yes, Barbara, proceed.
Comment I have is I think that the gold rush could be both. It could be a main theme and it could be a supporting theme.
That's just one point in history. So, but you're thinking that could be a specific, like an overarching that a lot of groups can, a lot of things can fall under.
Yes, I think it's very specific to this area that no other areas. I think it's more, it's an overarching theme to this area that is really important, that makes it stand out from other themes. Other places have water nexuses and other places have other things, even Native American experience, but I really think that one's an important one. But the gold rush is very unique to this National Heritage Area.
And this is Elizabeth. I'd like to support what Barbara is saying. The fellow who was sent by John Sutter to get the gold piece nugget surveyed came through Benicia, and it's the part of Benicia that's actually within the boundaries of the heritage area. And the original market that he came to buy goods and drink whiskey is, the building still exists. And it's on the, I think it's on the National Register.
And the 49ers were called the Argonauts. They came up the Sacramento River, which runs through the whole National Heritage Area. It's pretty common to all places in the area. Well, it's a larger area now than it was before, but I would just think it would be an overall arching theme.
Eric and Blake, I just wanted to point out that some folks are using the raise hand feature, and I'm not sure we've settled on a convention for queuing comments.
I got that, thank you. And let me, before I turn it over to Gia, let me provide a comment that was in the chat. It had to do with the supporting theme 3. What sort of recreational uses were there in the gold rush?
Think about
Good question. I think we need somebody that's a historian might be able to help me with that, but.
Yeah, and it's really not for you, Barbara. It's for our team at State Parks, because they're the ones who drafted this theme. And I think it's a good question, because I could think of two that are vices, not really recreation. But
well, that's fine. We wanted to set kind of an idea what recreation was. So obviously, if it's not gold rush, then yeah, let's say when.
Well, I mean, but the question's for you, Katie. You wrote it. What did you mean by that? Dating back to the gold rush here.
Can I just point out that the recreation dating back to the gold rush actually came, I think, from the feasibility study.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
It's something we definitely will look into, though. So I just want to let everybody know.
Okay, thank you. And on to Gia Moreno. Thank you for your patience, Gia.
Definitely will do.
Thank you, Eric. I just wanted to note that we should be really careful about how we address the gold rush. The gold rush was the beginning, well, not the beginning, but it was a huge part of the genocide of California natives. And so to romanticize it or idealize it is very problematic, and I don't want that to be something that is an issue for what we're doing here. It is something that's important to the history of California, but it's also something that it has a really dark past to it. And so being like, oh yeah, well, there's recreation in the gold rush era, it could be an issue.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Gia. And it, clearly there'll need to be some reconciliation between some of these themes, because primary theme 6 might run headlong into supporting theme 3 in that regard.
And then this is different than what we were given that Blake's in the email. And I noticed that in, I think, part 3 of that in that email, it neglected to talk about the Hispanic or Latino immigrants that made California ag, especially in the Delta, because we do have huge communities here.
And this is where thank you for that. This is where we wanted to talk about all the different cultures. So we didn't specifically call out anyone under people's stories, but we've got Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, other Latin speaking countries, and even, Portuguese and people as they come through too. So this is where this is where we would put that, the Latino experience would be here.
Yeah, Gia, you raise an important point too. I did just realize that what we sent out to the committee only had 5 themes. Katie, can you explain this last edition, and did anything else change in what we sent out with the meeting materials?
Well, I mean, I didn't see the meeting materials, but this is what we had sent to Blake last week.
Okay, well, what I'm looking at, which is what I sent out to the committee, has only 5 themes. So I mean, it's fine if you added number 6, but it just makes me wonder if anything else changed. And Blake, do you want to address this? I'm not sure how we came to forward this to the committee, but there's a discrepancy between what we sent and what we're looking at today.
I'm actually not quite, I have to double check on that. I didn't realize there was a difference between them.
I got 6.
Yeah, so this is Amanda, that we sent out, we included 2 documents. The first one was the interpretive themes as they, from the feasibility study. So you could see all of those.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
And then the second document is what we were proposing. And so you'd be able to see why the National Heritage Area was created and the themes that the National Park Service accepted as significant. And then what we're proposing is sort of to make them a little bit more accessible or easier to digest, So yeah, I think those are the 2 materials that we sent out. And
you're correct. And my apologies, Amanda.
that's okay.
I did not look at the second handout. So just to clarify, check the header on both of these handouts we sent out, because there is a distinction.
Yeah, it should tell you. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to let us know.
Yeah.
We just thought that might be an easy way to see where we started and where we were thinking of going.
That's
by
great.
Comparing those 2.
Well,
in retrospect.
This is Lenora Clark.
Yeah, Lenora, hold on. I'm going to put you in the queue. We have a couple of people before you. So Matt Holmes, then Carol, then Lenora, then Trevor, then Mike Moran. Go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to suggest if there's a way to get a slide that has all 6 themes on it. So as we talk about lumping and splitting, I mean, I can remember which 6 they are, but I think it makes sense for a group discussion to be able to see the 6 themes in one place. And then to just elevate Gia's comments about colonization needing to be handled carefully.
Great, thank you, Matt. Carol.
Thank you. To the point regarding websites that support these various themes, super. I think it's very important that we look towards bibliographic services. As Bob Chandler, the historian for Wells Fargo Emeritus, now deceased, used to say to me, Carol, nothing counts until you write it down. And key is going to be some bibliographic services. We've got the California State Library history section or department. I should think we could lasso them in somehow to aid us in bibliographic services that essentially compile bibliographies as they pertain to these themes. They have technology and tools, and it will allow for a very nice cross-referencing for topics that do indeed touch upon the edges or the substance of both themes. So let's put the California history room in the back of our heads and see if we can lasso some of their technological and bibliographic and library skills in helping us in this effort.
Great, thank you, Carol. Lenora, and then Mike Moran, then Trevor Rice, then Elizabeth, then Melissa.
Mine is more a question because I'm neither a lumper or a splitter, but it seems to me that my question is, will the themes that we're looking at bring us to the different task groups?
I'm not sure I understand. the
Yeah.
question. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I'm not sure that I understand the question.
Okay, I'm looking at the different themes that are listed here, and I know that part of the process is to drill down and come up with some task groups, I thought, to expand on the different themes.
Oh, I see.
Well, I believe that people signed up for a task group and for interpretation, and so that's where we would take these themes and work with that group to, mold them into something that's more workable. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I just didn't want you to hear my dog barking.
Oh,
Thanks,
that's
Lenora.
okay. Mine's out there chasing squirrels right now, so.
Nancy Morgan had a quick comment, and then I'll return to our queue. Nancy?
Thanks, Eric. I actually wanted to throw in something for the lumpers versus the splitters regarding national heritage areas. Because they are living landscapes and they're these larger regions, the National Park Service in this case seems to tend more towards the splitting than the lumping. Because if you have a theme, for example, that talks about immigration and how many cultures came together, well, that pretty much happens on every single national heritage area in the US. And so the same thing with, the putting together of agriculture and the reclamation, that trying to kind of lump it all under one larger thing. For heritage areas, because they do not necessarily have some of those absolutely key resources that Matt was kind of talking about earlier in the foundation statements for like national parks, where it drives everything. Sometimes that specificity in the themes that shows you how it is very different from the other large landscapes across the US are helpful. So that's just something to keep in mind as people are making comments. And then just to add to the discussion, since I have the floor, I don't know the region well enough, but as people are thinking about how the themes apply to the Delta, are those themes also applying to the larger portions of the heritage area that were kind of outside the traditional Delta, like the Carquinez Strait, for example? So I just, as people are thinking and commenting in the future, keeping in mind not just the heart of the Delta, but how do those themes apply to what the heritage area boundary is? That's it.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. A quick comment from the chat before I turn it over to Mike Moran. Living culture, this is a sub-theme in theme 6. It's suggested that should be plural, living cultures.
Oh, yes.
Great. Mike Moran, thanks for your patience.
Hey, no sweat. Thanks so much. This is a very interesting conversation. We're talking about some of the controversial subjects. I strongly suggest that people consider seizing that controversy. It's a very deep part of the whole Delta story and what makes it very compelling. So it's, I do appreciate the thought process going into being very careful where we tread on controversy, but to not let that keep us away from the controversy, because I find that makes the story really much more honest and transparent. I could see people were talking about the gold rush, and I think that it was a very interesting point that people were making, but I see it as a real big pivot point. So at first I thought gold rush maybe shouldn't be a theme, but then I thought, boy, as far as a pivot in the history of the Delta, it's a pretty important pivot that ended a lot and started a lot. So it's just, that was just kind of a stream of consciousness thing. And speaking to Nancy's point, the splitting versus lumping, it's a good exercise. I might suggest to really work on crystallizing, splitting different themes that all individually tell a part of the story of the Delta, and all themes together would tell that much more comprehensive. If we lump it all together, I'm not a lumper, I'm a bit of a splitter. We lump it all together, it's hard to decipher what the individual components are, those individual themes that bring importance to the entire Delta. And the Delta's always been a place of escape too. And that's something that I haven't picked up in the themes, is that folks have gone to the Delta to try new things and escaped other areas. And that could be part, I guess that's part of immigration.
Good
I'll take
points.
that one back. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Good points. Trevor, then Elizabeth, then Melissa. Trevor?
Thank you. Yeah, lots of good discussion about lumping and splitting here. And I was wondering if we could hear maybe a little bit more, and I know we're probably running out of time, about the decision or the thought around splitting out the Native American experience around theme 6. I appreciate the additional highlighting there. And I think there's a lot to tell there, a lot to talk about. But just wondering what the thoughts were. I know that it was sort of only obliquely mentioned in theme 1 from the feasibility study. But yeah, you know, it seems very similar to some of the themes talked about in theme 3. Obviously, you know, different in many ways as well. So just wondered if we could hear more about that.
Katie, do you want to take that one, or?
Yeah, we can share it.
Okay.
So when we were listening to, there was a couple different, there was a workshop in November, and also the last, our first meeting actually with this group. There was a large consensus from the group about really telling the Native American story and how important that is. We tend to, as white people, just and speaking as a white person, as an interpreter, gloss over a lot. Oh, the Native people were here and then everything else happened. And that's not the case. And I think this is a time where we should be, and I'm not trying to, we should be providing a focus on the indigenous peoples. It doesn't say that we're not going to make other groups be less important. It's just that we feel that from our discussions and our hearing what folks were saying at these other 2 workshops, is that it really needs to have its own, it needs to be as important as any of the other themes that we're talking about. Amanda, did you have anything else to add?
I just want to say that, so in the feasibility study, if you look at theme 1, it just covers everything, really. It's this big bucket that they sort of threw a lot of really important ideas that talk about the history of the Delta. And I think that's where Native Americans were included. And so I think when we were working through this, we were trying to manage theme 1. And we realized that it would be a really good idea to sort of split out the Native American story and experience and work with the tribes, because we felt that that was just, it was important, and that would make it easier to tell, to manage theme 1. So if that makes sense.
Can I do a brief, just a brief mention on this? I think one of the other things that we were thinking about when we were talking to Amanda and Katie before about this was that often a lot of the immigrant, I mean, there's the immigrant experience of coming to the Delta, but the Indian population that was here, the indigenous population that was here, had a different experience than many of the immigrants that came here. So that, I think that was part of the reason why it made sense to kind of differentiate those 2 groups.
That's great. Thank you, Blake. Elizabeth, and then Melissa. Thanks for your patience.
Sure, thanks. So at the start, this has been really a good conversation. I was thinking that many jurisdictions, agencies, and organizations, when they start their meeting, they acknowledge that it is on Indigenous people's lands. And there are short versions of that and longer versions. Maybe we could consider that, because I think that's really an important point, and we ought to keep that in mind. what originally I was going to say. So if that could be considered and then brought back to the committee, that would be great. What I really wanted to talk about was the description of the Bay Delta as an inverse Bay Delta. And it's the only inverse Bay Delta of the largest delta in the Americas that has a geologic feature of the strait. And if you can put that into a very short, simple statement, it makes it fascinating. And for those people who are really interested in that, it would be good to emphasize it. I had a question about the terminology artist, because there's a great deal of literature that's associated with the delta. And so my question is, and you can answer at the end of the 3 other points that I have, is are we using artist as inclusive for writers as well as fine arts? There's a reference to Delta watershed, and I think we want to be really careful and make sure that we define watershed that has a technical understanding. And I don't think people completely appreciate that it's the entire Sierra drainage. And I think is really important to get across. Well, I was curious in the discussion on the Indigenous Native American folks, is if there's any background on basket weaving. I was going to try to use the proper term, and if that could be noted, because the plant material in the Delta was critical to the types of baskets that were done, and that's acknowledging a tremendous asset to the Delta. And I liked the discussion about the gold rush, because in Benicia at the Yuba manufacturing site, which is right on the water, that the reason it's called Yuba is because it manufactured things that were used in gold mining, hydraulic mining. And there's even a model dredger for how that was put in place. It's the first industrial site in California, and it had foundries and structures and things like that. And those are my observations so far.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vice Chair Patterson. Melissa Tayaba, and then Douglas Shaw.
Hi, you guys. Thank you. Well, first, I love theme 1 and I love theme 6. Some of the reasons why I love theme 1 is because it focuses totally on the Delta and really points out why the Delta is just uniquely different from the rest of the United States and the world. I like theme 1 because I think you could really talk about that uniqueness and how important it is for water, for plants, and for animals. That theme also, you know, to me, when I think about the Delta, I think about the health of the Delta, and the state it's in right now is really bad. And so when I think of the Delta, I'm constantly trying to think about how to improve the Delta and how to keep the Delta and how to keep it and get it back to its original state. And, you know, that's being unrealistic in some areas, but as far as the health of it, as far as animals and the extinction of animals and plants, to me, those are very, very important things. The Delta obviously was the waterways, it was life to tribes. It's where we were. So I really love theme 1. I want to thank Gia for just bringing up the sensitivity of the gold rush, because right off the bat, gold rush, you know, that came out, and that's great. Gold rush is definitely a part of history. As Mike said, you know, that pivot, it happened, but what part of that story will be told this time? Because there's a whole other story to be told before Sutter came. And that's the story that has not been told. So when I hear Gold Rush, I always wonder what part of the story is going to be told about Gold Rush, right? Just to throw it out there, right now we're working with Sutter's Fort because they're trying to figure out how to tell this story better. Sutter came down, and now, what story are we going to tell? So just want to throw that out there also. And I wrote down some notes. I know somebody mentioned weaving and basketry, and thank you, because that is exactly what tribes are. That is their culture, that is their way of life, but that is also right now, here today, what we worry about are plants. Will we have willow? Will we have sedge? And these areas are our Aboriginal territories that our ancestors got those plants from. And so we're always trying to keep that connection and keep it going. So from a tribal perspective, she mentioned weaving, but just all the natural resources that we were using, we care about. So, that's a story in itself. And just kind of want to just remind you guys, our story has not been told before, and we would love to be able to tell it in any way, shape, or form that we can. And I think that's it. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Melissa. Douglas Shaw, and then we probably need, after Douglas, need to move on, but I am going to ask if there's any members of the public that want to provide public comment. But Douglas, you first.
Okay, well, yeah, I just like to bring up that there is a particular prominence of the Chinese presence in the Delta, because you can see there is the Bingong Tao in Islington, in Walnut Grove, and there was the Chinese KMT headquarters in Cortland, and of course Locke, and how it ties to the Chinese Revolution in 1911, because the founding father of modern China, he raised funds for his revolution from the Delta. So I think there is a particular prominence between of the Chinese in the Delta, and of course people, they are the major labor force that build the levees. So I think we should have a little bit of emphasis on that. And also that the first batch of Chinese pilots, fighter plane pilots were trained in Cortland.
Thank
where were they
you, Douglas.
trained? Cortland?
Yeah. In 1922, the first batch of the Chinese Air Force pilots were trained in Cortland. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Douglas. And this discussion is just indicative of the richness of what we have to work with in this national heritage area. It's really illuminating and exciting. And of course, our challenge is going to be, how we can, how we can do justice to all of these stories. So thank you for all who commented on the committee. Let me open it up real quick. If there are members of the public that would like to make a brief public comment. And Stacy, I might have muted a few of the callers. Can you remind them how to, if they are muted? Okay, well, we'll figure that out. I forgot it's star something on Zoom. Anyway, are there any public comment from the members of the public joining this committee meeting?
This is Jeremy Terhune. I'm one of Eric's staffers. Hello, Eric.
And yeah, if you could be brief, Jeremy, but we're moving on. Go ahead.
I'm a fly on the wall. I just wanted to say hello. I'm a fly on the wall, working on the Great Delta Trail Master Plan, and I'm a resident in Stockton, California, and there's a lot of motivation and interest in my community with the National Heritage Area. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. Any other public comment? Okay, well, that was a really great discussion, and thank you to Katie and Amanda. Can one of you give a reminder if people have additional they would like to provide? How would you like to receive them? And
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to also just to wrap up.
thank you, please.
Yeah, so we're capturing all of the ideas here and throughout this process, and what the intention is too, as well, is that we're not going to, all the information that we're getting is not going to go anywhere. It's going to actually be included as a matrix that anybody can look at, and as they're going through to get ideas for programs and content, they can see what the wide range of things we can talk about. So don't think that we're gonna that what you're saying here is going to be lost. And the next steps, so we're going to be sending out that interpretive themes survey. So we'll get that link out to Blake, and then he'll send it out to folks. We're going to have working group meetings, so that task group. We're going to have several times where people can have comments on the draft themes for public review and input. So this is only the very start of the process. But thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Okay, well, thank you, Katie. Okay, all right, well, let's move on to agenda item number 4. This is an update on the task group formation, and Carolyn Brackett, part of our Point Heritage Development Consulting team, is going to take this item.
All right. Hi, everyone. Have I got this up loud enough? Can everybody can hear me? Yes. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Hello, and really enjoyed listening to the conversation. And as Katie pointed out, this is the first of what will be many, many conversations. Because I think with National Heritage Areas, when you get right down to it, it's what is the story that you want to tell? And as somebody also brought up, then who gets to decide what the story is and how it's told? And so the comments that were made here just really got that conversation off to a great start. And I also got to learn a new expression, lumpers and splitters. I'm gonna have to remember that. So what I want to talk about, and I think on the agenda, there's a big chunk of time allotted for this, and I promise I won't take this much time because Augie and Nancy are going to talk about partnerships and best practices, and we want to allow plenty of time for that because we'll want to have a conversation with that as well. But so if it's all right with everybody, I'm just going to put 4 and 5 together on the agenda because talking about the advisory task groups leads right into the schedule and how we're going to get this moving this year. So so I want to start, and you all saw this last time, just with a reminder, we have 4 advisory task groups. We've already been talking about the interpretive planning group. And then we also have resource stewardship, heritage development, tourism, and organization. So I want to say a couple of things about that. One is, if we thought about an organizational chart of how this is going to work, these task groups are kind of the center of the universe. This is going to be the conduit for the planning, for processing information that comes from public meetings, from stakeholder interviews, from outreach, for all of these task groups. And then it's going to, and the planning process. So what the task groups do, all of them, is going to kind of flow both directions. Up to the advisory committee for review and decision at important points in the process, and then out to the public as we move forward with public engagement. And the overall goal is going to be to build partnerships throughout the Delta, which we can see is already happening already some good partnerships there. So since our last meeting, our first meeting of the advisory committee, we sent out invitation for everybody to sign up for task group that you are interested in, and thank you. We want to say thank you very, very much for the great response that we had. I think everybody has signed up for at least one, and some people have signed up for 2 task groups. So I just quickly run through what each task group's responsible for, and then we'll talk about the things that we'll be focused on coming up really soon to get the process moving. With interpretive planning, obviously the interpretive themes that we've just been talking about, that's going to be first up, along with getting the resource inventory. So clearly those 2 things go together. So there'll be meeting about that, as well as public engagement. So this is who we have signed up for this committee. If you don't see your name on the right committee, let us know. Or if there's one that you've thought about and want to join, also please let us know following this meeting, and we'll make sure that we get everybody on the right committee. So from the advisory committee, this is who has signed up. Our next step for all of these is going to be the outreach to people who aren't on the advisory committee, but may be subject matter experts or have a particular interest in one of these task groups and want to participate. So we'll be building out these task groups a little bit more with some other folks before we start meeting. So this is interpretive planning. Resource stewardship, somebody asked about conservation related activities, conservation, preservation. This is where those conversations will happen and where that information will flow in and out of. Again, with data collection, but focus specifically on resource stewardship. For that committee, this is who we have signed up so far for this committee. And then the next one is heritage development and tourism. And this is really going to build on the first 2 committees, thinking about, okay, we have these resources, we have these stories. Now what are we going to do? And so this committee is going to be taking a look at what are the opportunities to further develop heritage resources, heritage cultural natural resources, and also think about visitation in terms of, is that a good economic development tool? Let me find the slide here. So this is who we have signed up for this committee. And then our final committee is the organization task group. And this group will activate a little bit later in the process than the others, because once we start thinking about the organizational strategy, we'll need to have some sense of what, as a heritage area, what are the areas of focus going to be? What are the goals and strategies? And that in itself will help inform what the organizational structure will look like, what that's going to mean in terms of budget and staffing. So that'll come a little bit later. And we have these folks signed up so far. So before I talk about, the next thing I want to talk about is the schedule, which will include these task groups. But before I do that, I'll just stop here and ask if anybody has any questions, anything you've thought about since our last meeting in terms of the responsibilities of these committees and what we'll be doing that I can answer before we talk about the schedule.
Carolyn?
Yes.
So I just have I for somehow didn't get the email, or maybe it got dumped somewhere. But yeah, I'm very interested in signing up with a couple of tax sources that I've already seen. Can we do that at another time in the future?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think Blake, are you there? I can't see you, but I'm assuming you're still there. Yes, we'll follow up after this meeting. We had like a template you can fill out, and just let us know which committee you want to serve on. We'll be delighted to sign you up. So yeah, great. Thank you.
James, I'll send that form to you again.
Thank you, Blake. I appreciate that.
Okay, and Lenora Clark didn't get the form either.
Okay. Great. Blake.
Yeah, Blake, let's follow up this meeting with that to everyone. And, you know, again, please, it's not too late. At some point, someone's going to talk about one of these task groups meeting sometime soon. Doesn't have to be now, but there's plenty of time to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to be in on the ground floor.
Yep. So thank you all for letting us know. So those pesky old spam folders can mess things up. So thanks. We'll make sure you get that information. Any questions, any other comments before we talk about the management plan schedule? Okay. So we are at the point now that we are really ready to get rolling on development of the management plan. We are working on a schedule right now of when various meetings will be held. So we'll be getting that out to you really soon, so you'll know, be able to put those on your calendar. So what I want to give you today is an overview of the things that we're really going to focus on for 2021 to get as far as we can down the path of getting this management plan done. So just a few things to let you know. Management plan is developed in phases. I think what we'll do next is put together basically a chart showing the process of the time, you know, different things we'll be working on and how it all comes together. Throughout the process, we'll be looking at community engagement and outreach, building a network of partnerships. And again, Augie and Nancy are going to talk about that in a minute. We're going to be sure we're coordinating because we have several players involved in this and doing guiding the process in various pieces and parts. So we have our consultant team, Point Heritage, California State Parks, Delta Protection Commission, the National Park Service. So we'll be working to make sure we're coordinating everything and keep it moving forward. And then most important, that the final plan will meet the requirements. The National Park Service will approve the management plan, and that will be kind of overarching our work. So for startup, this spring, we'll be looking at these things. As I said, we'll be outlining the steps for the management plan and sharing that with you all. In fact, we have a meeting next week with National Park Service staff to go over their requirements. I think you all know these are the first national heritage areas that have been designated in 10 years. So we want to be sure that we are up to speed on any changes that might be made or areas of emphasis. So we'll be talking with National Park Service staff about that. We'll be beginning data collection for interpretive planning, which Katie and Amanda have talked about. We'll be looking at best practices, and again, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, so we'll get some direction from you all in terms of what would be most helpful to know. I mean, there are 54 other national heritage areas out there, all doing different things, all in different stages of development and activities and organization. And so they're great lessons to learn, things that may be helpful to not have to reinvent the wheel. So we'll be working on gathering that information. Planning for first public meetings, and then hopefully, knock wood, everybody getting their vaccination, depending on lifting travel restrictions. We want, our consultant team, we want to be back on the ground. It's been a year since we've been there, and we really want to be back on the ground, have an opportunity to meet with you all in person, see more of the region, all the things that need to happen. For us to really get immersed in the area as the plan develops. Also this spring, we'll begin convening 3 of the task groups: the resource stewardship, heritage development, and tourism and interpretive planning, holding the planning workshop for interpretive planning this summer. It'll probably be summer, and hopefully by then, if we're lucky, we'll be able to hold the first public meeting in person. If not, we have done public meetings on Zoom in the past year, and it is doable, and it can function very well. But if again, knock wood, we hope we'll be able to do that in person. And then upcoming advisory committee meetings. And I think at the end, Eric, you'll be talking about the schedule for the next meetings. So by this fall, what we'll be looking at in terms of parts of the plan, the phases, or some of things that we really hope to have big chunks already under control and underway. One would be the resource inventory. That's going to be first up for all of these committees to help us talk about that and how we want to go about that, connect it to the themes. The foundation statement is also something that grows out of the planning process, but there are pieces of that, the themes, significant statement, historic context, those kinds of things, especially the historic context, because there's so much good history information in the feasibility study and in other documents, that we'll be able to go ahead and do some of those things this year. And then, of course, developing the interpretive themes in that framework that will help guide us forward in goals and strategies as we move into that phase. So that's kind of where we are. What you'll be getting sooner rather than later is a more firm schedule of when committees will be meeting. As soon as we finish the additional outreach for other members of the task group, we'll start setting dates for those and sending you all more information about what we'll be looking for in the upcoming months in the way of your involvement and the work that we'll be doing as well. So any questions about that or any comments, things you all want to share?
Yeah, I don't see any hands raised, but if you want to jump in or raise your hand, I'll recognize you either way. Any questions, clarifying questions for Carolyn?
Okay. Great.
Oh. Okay. Well, Carolyn, thank you.
Sure. I'm going to close this out so that we can move to the next agenda item. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So agenda item number 6 is review of National Heritage Area best practices and preferred focus areas. And for this one, we'll turn it over to our consulting team members, Nancy Morgan and Augie Carlino.
Well, thank you, everybody. This is Augie Carlino, consultant with the team, Point Heritage Development. It's good to see everybody again. We were just talking yesterday as Blake and Eric and Nancy and Carolyn and I were going over the final points of this, that it was literally a year ago, yesterday, today, that we were in the Delta and have not been able to return because of this pesky pandemic. I'm glad you're all safe, but we are definitely looking forward to getting back there. We had a good time when we were there, and you have an incredible area. So what we're talking about right now is sort of a throwing into the pot when we talk about best practices of, and I'm not doing that. This is Nancy's in the background running this slideshow for me. So if this slideshow takes off, we're going to holler at Nancy. The slides have disappeared, and I think she knows why. She's taken it off of automatic run. But let me start talking because we have limited time. When we're talking about best practices, I want you all to understand that it isn't just a management plan that you're working on developing. What you're working toward is actually a living, dynamic, organic process that's going to play out over the course of time with this plan as the foundation and the anchor and the strategy of what you all intend to do. It's a process and a practice and a step that every heritage area has taken since their designation. These management plans are critical to identifying not just management, but actually it becomes the gel that connects this network of partners together in order to get something done on the landscape. And that's what we want to talk about with you right now by way of best practices. You were given some homework. that we asked you to read as you went into this. And we also want to remind you and hope you can remember the last time we met, those slides that we went through where we gave you some very limited examples of what other heritage areas do in those fields of interpretation, education, and others. So with that in mind, we want to launch you into this, I don't want to say a scientific or theoretical discussion of heritage areas, but understand what comes out of this in the end when you have created the heritage area and you're there 10 years from now at the end of this management plan, looking back and saying, wow, look at what we've accomplished. I want you to understand how you get there. This makes up the essence of what best practices are. So we know, as defined by the Park Service, that national heritage areas are a collaborative strategy on a landscape level, usually a very large landscape, complex in the sense of people that live there, the businesses that are there, and the culture and the history that permeates the region. When you look at that and what can a heritage area do, we're all challenged by the heritage area program of looking at these tasks or goals: historic preservation, cultural conservation. The two are distinct. When we talk about preservation and historic, we're talking about the built environment. When we're talking about cultural conservation, we're talking about those intangible elements of us as people and what we have brought to the region and the community. Our heritage as people not only have settled there, but new people coming in. All this is tied together through education and interpretation. Those stories that you heard the others talk about earlier, what you're going to be working on by way of interpretation and education in the sense of what I describe as the big E and the little e. The little e education is a sense of what we learn when we visit museums, read interpretive signage, but then the capital E, not to say it's any more important, is what do you decide you're going to help work with schools maybe on to put into curriculum that can help teach us. You've got a natural area that is made up of an incredible resource of water and land. In that is not only a function of economy and business, but it's also an element of recreation that's built into that asset. That attracts people. That's the tourism element. And all of that combined together leads to some form of economic development for the region. That's what heritage areas do. And the end goal is what we get tested on and measured by when we report to Congress and we report to the National Park Service and other funders that are there. Next, Nancy. So what are these strengths that we've got going for heritage areas? These stories that we're talking about that'll build out of that interpretive planning session you're going to go through, they create a sense of connection and civic engagement for each other because it's a commonality, like I said. We all share in all of our heritage areas, we all share an element of similarity of why we're here, why our ancestors settled here, why we came here maybe. And that creates, through the heritage area, this platform, this foundation for action. When we do that, we build this big, broad, integrated vision of telling the story of a region. And with that then becomes a designation that you all have. You're one of 55 national heritage areas in the United States. That is a label that is of significance because of that designation, and that adds value to what you're doing. And with that, that federally designated coordinate entity, the Delta Protection Commission, that designation as the federally designated coordinate entity and the organization provides to you some credibility, not some, a lot of credibility and clout that says we've got an ability to get this done. You're going to be leveraging assets that attract other things that help build out this heritage area in other ways that we'll show you as we move on in this. Next. All the heritage areas face challenges at the beginning. You have to raise money in order to release the money from the federal government. So obtaining that funding, the diversity of funding is critical, and obtaining it in a way that sustains the operation and the function of the heritage area becomes a part of the issue as well. We had this problem before. I apologize about it. Overcoming size and geography. You know, you've got a big area. Not every heritage area is as large as yours is. You've got a large area of multiple communities, multiple partnerships that are out there. That is something that sometimes can be a limiting factor to heritage areas. But let me reassure you, there are heritage areas that are larger than you that succeed in overcoming that size and geography. The important thing to do in that geography and that limitation or that wall of capacity or of geography is to build the capacity to know that the heritage area organization isn't the only organization out there working to do that. In order to do that, a lot of times you have to overcome these institutional barriers, because sometimes the partnerships and those individual partners just are not used to working with each other in a way. And that's okay, because what you're building is in a relationship process of this organization and the heritage area. And you're trying to achieve an alignment of goals and objectives with organizations. You're not coming in to tell them yours is the best way. You're trying to see how you fit. Next slide. So what I want you to think about is this program input. And this is where we get a little bit theoretical, but live with me on this. This is actually the result of a study that the National Park Service did about maybe 10, 12 years ago on national heritage areas, answering the question for Congress and everyone else out there, why do they work so well? Why is it? Well, there's a combination of things in here. The inputs into all this is the federal designation, the identification of a management entity with staff to help get things done, the creation of plans that are at the community level, the basis of plans developed at a community level with community input, so that those plans actually have buy-in and ownership at the community. Everything that you do, we know, is critical for a factor of one thing, money. You need to have money in order to implement. And so that plan just doesn't sit on the shelf. And so with that designation, there is seed money that comes from the National Park Service. The Park Service also becomes a partner at the table to you. They become a technical assistance partner in helping you get things done. When you have all of this building together, as this slide will build out further, what you have is this implementation context that runs through every heritage area, this network development that comes together, and then the sustaining of this network that comes together in order to help you build a very long-term goal strategy for making this heritage area work. This is all the context for best practices of other national heritage areas. It's not something that the Heritage all set out to say, this is what we want to do. But when the Park Service looked at it, this is what every heritage area does. It's just something built into the nature of how they function and what they do when we're going out and we're working in the communities to build this complex network of partners. Next slide. So what kind of partners are out there? Well, this is just a small slice of what other heritage area partners have through heritage areas. Main Street and downtown revitalization organizations. I'm not going to read these all, right? But they all exist out there in your region. Arts organizations. We heard a lady talking about arts before. We obviously have the tribal governments, agricultural organizations, critical to you and critical to a lot of other heritage areas that were out there. The business side of it, chambers of commerces that are there. Trail organizations, important not just from the standpoint of land-based trails, but also a lot of heritage areas have built water trails for the recreational element of tourists or residents using the water resources there as part of that recreation and natural resource. Next slide. So what do we know from these partnerships is that they all work in the form of networks, and you have to build from that in order to build the best practice of a heritage area for this network to come together. This one is key because this becomes a certain issue of breaking down those institutional barriers. You as the heritage area advisory committee that represent all the groups that you are coming together with, this heritage area and all of them really are not there necessarily for control or influence, but to build that partnership, to make everybody realize that there's this interconnection that forms with the heritage area coming together. So it is more of influencing a partnership than it is of controlling a partnership. We'll see that on these next bullets as it plays out in the next couple slides of what we mean. And again, understand, this is all from a study that the National Park Service did when it looked at how heritage areas are working. What the heritage area management entity does is it becomes this hub, this central location of communication, of bringing people together. Tonight, as an example, you're all here because of the Delta Protection Commission asking for involvement from the community. It becomes literally sometimes an art of managing these relationships in order to help implement the National Heritage Area's goals and strategies of what needs to be done. And when you get that, you get a network of considerations, right? The architecture, the structure of the heritage area, you build partnership capacity, and what you end up doing more than anything on the ground is help build leadership and capacity within these communities. Not saying that your communities are devoid of that necessarily. Sometimes communities, for a whole bunch of socioeconomic reasons, might lack that. You can be that influencer to build that, to help identify that so those communities can do what they want to do. In other places, you're actually bolstering them or adding to them a little bit of extra oomph. That is that leadership that then begins to take the organization and then take the heritage area to next levels of what they tend to achieve. Next. Now I want to show you actual studies of heritage areas when I talk about this network collaborative, right? These next 3 slides are going to show you the complexity of a heritage area, and in it, the result of its best practice is this network that you see here. When the Park Service did a study back in 2007, it went into 3 national heritage areas and asked the question of partners, what makes this heritage area work and why? And why are you at the table of it? And for almost all the partners, what they said was, look, we knew that there were other partners out there and we might have had some limited connection to them. But what the heritage area did was become this catalyst for bringing together this broader partnership. And what the Park Service ended up studying after these heritage areas, all of these 3 were around for about 10 or 12 years in existence. So they had a track record of programs and projects of what they were working on. All those things, like I pointed out, preservation, conservation, cultural heritage, recreation, economic development, tourism. Each one of these little dots on this network represents one of those partners, literally, and a specific partner that the Park Service identified. Each number corresponds back to a report of who that organization is or what that organization is. The red dot in the middle, the big red dot in this case, is the heritage area. And those smaller red dots are other partners that are of size and significance that are bringing something to the table. In this case with Cane River, and Nancy Morgan, our colleague on this was the heritage area that she helped create, and she worked for as the executive director. She was there when this study was done. This network shows the hub, the influencing partner, the heritage area, and that interconnectivity that resulted from that hub. And you can see how that hub is bringing those people. It's a cross dynamic of all these different organizations, some of which never had even a relationship with each other. But because the heritage area was designated and there were programs and projects put forward that developed a process where everybody can be together in sort of this large organic structure, the success of what came out of Cane was this dynamic partnership. This is what we hope we are able to get with you to develop the best practices for your heritage area. Next slide, and you'll see, I want to point out, and don't go back to it, but Cane is a small heritage area, 1 or 2 parishes in northwestern Louisiana, more rural than urban. It does have a city in it, Atchafalaya, or I'm sorry, no, did I mess that up, Nancy? It wasn't Atchafalaya, it's a different city. Natchitoches is the city that it's in. But these next slides are moving to bigger urban landscapes and becoming more complex because there are more players on the table that are around the table. This one is Blackstone National Heritage Area, one of the very first national heritage areas created, like Cane, and then the next one. The red dot in the middle is the National Heritage Area. Those smaller red dots all around it are other bigger partners that are working with the heritage area. So when I say that, what I'm talking about is it could be, in this case, a city government or a planning agency or a chamber of commerce or a university or a college. And then again, all those dots out there are other partners that are brought to the table because of the interrelationship of these projects that come out of the heritage area management plan, trail organizations, arts organizations, historic preservation organizations, some of whom never had a relationship with the others that they are now working for, but are now working with, I should say, because the heritage area became the influencer, right? Now watch this next one, because this one is really fascinating. This is in Allentown in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, Delaware and Lehigh National Heritage Area. Actually, if you're going to look at it from an urban standpoint, now this is a little north of Philadelphia, but not necessarily the Philly region, but the size of this urban area is probably no different than what it was for Blackstone in the urban area in Rhode Island. But what makes this one more dynamic is that this one has a state program behind the national program. In Pennsylvania, there is a state heritage program that is exactly mirroring the goals and objectives of what the National Heritage Area program wants to achieve. And so the complexity of this network is even more dynamic than the other three. Not saying that this heritage area is the best of the three, They all work in a very unique structure and way, and they are all extremely successful. But the overlay of this state system on top of the federal system brings together a whole bunch of other partners to the table. I think this is something you've got the potential for, obviously, because of Delta Protection Commission being state, that this is going to be, you're going to see 10, 20 years from now, if you chart this out, this could be the complexity that you've achieved in the Delta with your heritage area. Next. So what do we know and what have we talked about? You've had homework from this. A partnership project and a feasibility study identified some elements of best practices for other heritage areas. But what we want to begin the discussion with you tonight is building off of what we need to do going forward. We're going to create for you a memo on how national heritage areas work. We're going to examine other national heritage areas. We need to look at those and identify the commonalities and the similarities to what they have with the Delta, and then bring that back to you with future discussions so that we can craft those into not just the programs and projects that you might want to take on, but that organizational slide that Caroline showed, that we want to build that into the organizational structure so that you all are looking at and building off of the success of what other heritage areas are. You're going to be unique. This doesn't mean you have to duplicate exactly what other heritage areas do or are doing, but we want to give you some ideas. And with that, we want to know from you, having done the homework, which we asked you to do, what is it that intrigues you about what heritage areas do? Not only from what you read, but maybe from this theoretical process that we walked you through now. What is it that you want to see coming forward as we work with you on building out these examples so that we can give them to you in the next meeting? So with that, I'll ask Nancy if she has anything to add to that, but I'll open it up for questions or comments too, to you all.
I don't have anything to add, so let's move on into discussion.
Well, if she has nothing to add, that means I did a good job. So, hey.
You all always do a good job. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you very much, Augie, and for the effort that went behind pulling this together. Committee members, are there any comments or questions or anything you'd like to say at this point? You can certainly digest it too. I'm doing that here, but
that's Matt, a lot of information. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, it is a lot of information. It's great information. I'm a believer, and I'm kind of like trying to drag my regional folks into appreciating this concept as well. So, talking to county folks and city folks in the Stockton area, there's no leaving Stockton out of this story, whatever was planned in the past. And so, I don't know, I might like some help from you all sharing a similar presentation at some point with local folks, just so that, local historical society, local city council. I work with a climate resilience coalition, and just to sort of bring in more partners to help support this idea would be super helpful.
Happy to do that with you, Matt.
Thanks.
Any other comments from committee members? Trevor, please.
Yeah, one thing that I think deserves highlighting as well is not only looking at what we expect of the NHA, but what the effort to get to this point has already done, what the DPC is already doing well. There are some things that immediately come to mind for me on that list, and I won't go into them too much now, but also looking at what other organizations are already doing and what their sort of what needs are already being met and where the gaps are is another thing that I think we could look at as we go through this process. So excited to do that, and really excited for the possibilities that this is going to grow into.
Trevor, that's a great point because not to just duplicate what you said, but the management plan is going to identify other organizations and what they are doing, because out of that, there could be funding that the heritage area gets that could help those other organizations too, right? And naming those organizations and what they're doing is critical to that whole dynamic that gets created out of this. The key to understand, which I hope was clear, is that the heritage area is not an organization that does everything by itself, right? The achievements on the ground of what is a successful heritage area comes out of all of those organizations doing something, big or small, but that doesn't mean less important than the other. That over time builds this successful heritage complexity that exists for a region. And you know, it's just amazing to be a part of when you are. It's a lot of fun.
I just wanted to add to that as a former heritage area director, when we first saw the network mapping, and because we'd all been talking about partnerships for years and years and years, and the concept that it's not partnerships, it's a network of partnerships that is what sets heritage areas apart. And the fact that we have the opportunity through the management planning process and beyond to build that network, it was so eye-opening to see that's how heritage areas actually have a major impact on a region over time. I'm gonna, since I have my space bar down and I'm unmuted, I'm also gonna just say, so as we put together a memo on NHA best practices, some of the things that we figure we can look at, and this is not necessarily the condition assessment, but Trevor, you're talking about that of what's going well in the Delta, what's happening, what has been done to date. This is looking around the US and saying, just like in the homework that you were given this week, what's a good way to approach partnerships? You know, what other heritage areas have waterways in them that have projects that could be applicable here? What other heritage areas are managed by state entities? So those are the types of things we're looking at. What are some ideas we could get from areas across the US that have been down this path before that could help us as we walk down this path of management planning and into implementation?
Thank you. Any other comments, or anyone want to offer anything before I open it up for public comment? Committee members? Okay.
Can you
Are
hear
there
me?
any? Yeah,
can you
please
hear me?
go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I like the idea that we're considered the catalyst for it, right? So, you know, we just enable things along in the partnerships, right? And so I think that's why it lasts.
That's great. I think I know who this is, but would you like to identify yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. I've got screen sharing from somebody else on my screen and stuff, so I can't really see. I'm Janet Lake from Freeport.
Oh, I'm sorry, Janet, committee member Janet Lake. Thank you.
Yep.
Actually, I was mistaking your voice with someone else. So thanks for introducing yourself, and appreciate the comment. Any other comments from committee members? Okay, any public comments? Those, and we've had a few people joining us. By the way, at the height, we had 36 people on this meeting, just FYI. Any comments from the public? Okay. Point Heritage Team, are there any final words you'd like to make out, or what the next steps might be on, you know, the best practices, or did you already cover that in the concluding slide?
Yeah, that was all covered in the slide, Eric. Yep.
Okay, very good.
Eric, one of the things that I was going to do when I send out more information to the advisory committee, I think I'm going to provide a link to a map of all the national heritage areas across the country, which might be helpful in some respects because it would allow you, members of the committee to kind of realize, okay, this is a place that might be similar to what we have here, or this might be an issue that, or they might share an issue that we have. So it's funny that we often, I've looked at Louisiana as kind of an example because Louisiana also has a very similar similar geography to what we have in some ways. And so, you know, and Chapalaya is also run by a state agency. So there's some interesting examples out there for people to look at.
And Blake, when you do that, you know, not to short circuit anyone's exploration, because there's no better way to spend time than looking at National Heritage Area materials from throughout the country. It'll make you want to get out there and go on a trip, I can assure you. But if there are some that you think are particularly apt, feel free to suggest those to people just as a shortcut.
I might rely on Augie and Nancy to give me a few examples as well.
Yeah, indeed.
We definitely will.
Okay, any other comments from the committee?
Eric, this is Lenora Clark.
Hi, Lenora.
Just as Blake is going to send out information on links to other heritage areas, at our last meeting, there were a number of presentations by groups that have already done some preliminary work on mapping and getting out communications on the Delta. Can you provide those to us also? Because we don't want to reinvent the wheel if there's work that's already been completed that we might be able to expand upon.
Yeah, that's a good question, Lenora, and actually a good link to, is it true that we have a location where we post materials related to this committee? And is that something that our committee members have access to? But Blake, talk a little bit about that if you would.
Yes, we do right now have for the committee members a SharePoint site that has information, presentations from the last few meetings, or the last meeting, I should say, and also just to let you know, we have the video from the recording from the last meeting up on our YouTube site today. That just came up today. So yeah, I think one of the things I will do, you've received binders before, but one of the things I could do is sort of provide some resources that might be useful for the committee.
Yeah, that'd be great, Blake. Provide the links, any help that if it's at all complicated to navigate through a link to open up the site, give some help on that. And yeah, I think everyone here was in attendance at the first meeting 2 months ago. If not, I'd encourage you to take a look at the recording. We will post the recording of today's meeting much sooner, even though I think we're only missing one committee member today. We have really stellar attendance. So, but it could be of interest to those of you who want to, revisit a particular presentation. So we will endeavor to get that up on the YouTube channel, and Blake will provide a link to that in the follow-up email that he's sending. And Douglas Shaw had his hand raised.
Oh, just one question going back to Augie. Augie was talking about that we have to raise fund in order to get the funding from the federal government. So is that a matching fund arrangement?
It is, Mr. Shaw. The ratio or the formula is $1 of federal money to match $1 of non-federal money. But what's interesting about that is the match can come in a lot of different ways. It could be actually cash that you raise, right? It could come from the state. It could come from a foundation. It could come from donations. This is part of the best practices we'll look at as part of the organization as examples of how others raise money. But it also can be in kind. So if there are services that are provided by a partner, the value of those services are counted by the heritage area, reported to the Park Service, that allows for the release of that money. Here's what's really interesting about that. Let's say the heritage area were going to make grants, right? Which a lot of heritage areas do. They take the money they get from the federal government, they put a part of that out in the community by way of grants. And let's just use round numbers. Let's say you were going to make a $10,000 grant to a trail organization that was going to build interpretive signs along a trail. And that organization, let's say, has a $50,000 total project, of which you're contributing $10,000. That $40,000 that they have, plus your $10,000, right? That $40,000 that they have is counted as match to your $10,000. So it's not necessarily money that you have to raise, but it's that partnership network that's bringing money to the table to complete and achieve a common goal project that the heritage area has. That's considered the match too, right? Now, it's always good to raise money because that helps sustain the organization. You have to pay bills, you got to pay staff. So that's part of the process too. But don't think that every single thing that you do has to have an actual cash match as a part of it. That can sometimes frighten people in ways that makes them afraid of the fundraising element of it.
Yeah, good point, Augie. In fact, the in-kind instance that you all provide as members of this advisory committee, the committee will do a pretty good job of documenting our match just from our internal spending on NHA efforts, at least for the next few years when we're likely to only get about $150,000 annually from the federal government. But we're working on a easy to use form for you all as volunteers to fill out. Maybe that's something we can talk about the next time we meet, because it would be great to get that documented before our memories become too dim. Barbara Daly had a question or a comment. Barbara?
Yes, I'd just like to stop a minute and go back to other NHAs. And I believe there's one called Yuma Crossing down at the bottom of the Colorado River. And that might be a really good one for us to look at. And sounds like they might have a very similar geography, et cetera. So if we could add that to the list, that would be great while you're looking.
Yep.
People might want to travel there. It's one of the closer ones.
Yeah, it's probably maybe the Washington state's closer by miles, but it's right on the California border and on the Colorado River, excuse me. So thanks for that, Barbara. Good point. Okay, any additional comments? Okay, let me ask you, we kicked around internally the next date for this committee. We were talking about keeping it kind of consistent and angling in on the first Thursday in May. That would be May 6th. Can I ask, well, let me ask this way. If there are any objections or problems with that date, or even for this kind of standing time for the committee meetings, I think at some point we'll want to meet more frequently than every other month, but with the work that the task group, at least one of them will be doing between now and then, I think we don't need to convene this group until early May. But does that, are there any objections to May 6th, 3 to 5 p.m.? Okay, well, we will hold that date. We'll send out a notice with the email that Blake is sending so that you can mark that on your calendar. We'll get a meeting invitation out soon as well, so it's on your calendars. I want to thank our Point Heritage team, but really I want to thank the committee members. This was a great exchange of information today. I love seeing your deep engagement in this, and it augurs well for the work we're going to do moving forward. So thank you. If there are any final comments, member announcements, I'll open the floor to that. Any member announcements? James, go ahead.
Yeah, Eric, thank you. I just want to make the public announcement. Maybe some of you know, but we're hoping that Al's Place here in Locke, which is one of the kind of anchor businesses here in town, hopefully with new owners, they're looking at opening very shortly, possibly this weekend, in the future though. So we should have Al's back up and running, which is good news for us.
That is good news. Everyone get out to Al's. Thank you, James. Great announcement. Anything else?
I had a quick one, Eric. Just
Yes.
wanted to share, my organization was in a contract to collect public comment on the very new Delta Stewardship Council Climate Vulnerability Assessment. And it's a pretty terrifying document with lots of impacts for this region. There's also solutions, and so this committee should consider it. And a lot of good science, and we should make sure that skewed climate impacts are matched with skewed funding response mechanisms. And hopefully we can count on you guys to, stand up for the Delta with the coin that's out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. And yeah, the commission will be providing comments on the draft vulnerability assessment. Those comments are due on the 16th of March. So Barbara, you're muted.
Oh, just a second.
No, you're fine. We can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
And I'd just like to add the trees are so important to the Delta. So really want to focus on the trees and how beautiful. Yes, right. I saw that, and how beautiful they are along the river and in the Delta all over the place. So that's really important to me too.
They show up for work every day. They're the best employees I
That's
ever.
right. We love them.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Barbara. Any other committee member comments? Okay, we're a few minutes beyond 5. Apologies, but I think it was a real fruitful discussion that led us a few minutes over. So thank you all for hanging out with us. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and look for follow-up information from Blake, and mark your calendars, May 6th